Some books shape civilizations, others burn them down. And then there's the Malleus Maleficarum, a thick, mean, fear-driven manual from 1486 that turned whispers into trials and trials into executions. Its title means the hammer of witches, and for nearly 2 centuries, it struck with brutal efficiency. Today, we're going inside the book, where it came from, what it actually says, and how it reshaped Europe's darkest anxieties into something that looked like law. Witches who, in this way, sometimes collect male organs in great numbers, as many as 20 or 30 members together, and put them in a bird's nest or shut them in a box, where they move themselves like living members and eat oats and corn. To understand the Malleus, you need to understand the world it came from, a Europe cracked open by plague, fear, and superstition. In the late 1400s, the Black Death has killed a third of the population. Families are rebuilding, trade routes are shifting, whole villages carry the trauma of mass death. When your crops fail, you blame the neighbor. When your child gets sick, you blame spirits. If a cow stops giving milk, you swear something unnatural is at work. People didn't have science back then. They had theology, rumor, and tradition, and they filled the gaps in knowledge with stories of the devil. Even the church is struggling. Authority is slipping. Local superstitions are rising, and no unified doctrine explains what witchcraft actually was. Every region had its own rules. Some treat it like mischief, others just ignored it, and others are just afraid to touch it entirely. There is no handbook, no centralized definition, no single method of dealing with supposed witches. And into that vacuum steps a Dominican inquisitor whose entire career is about to explode outward into print. The Malleus Maleficarum lists 2 authors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, but in reality, the Malleus is the brainchild of one man. Kramer was famously intense, an inquisitor obsessed with sexual sin, female purity, and the idea that demons walk among humans, just waiting for weaknesses to exploit. Blessed is the man who has a virtuous wife. He tried to prosecute a batch of accused witches in Innsbruck in 1485 and failed so completely that the local bishop more or less told him to go home. The townspeople considered him unstable, too aggressive, too fixated, and he hated that. The Malleus became his response, a manifesto written by someone deeply frustrated that the church didn't see the world the way he did. Sprenger's name, meanwhile, was likely just added later, either by publishers or admirers, hoping to give the book more weight. There's no firm evidence he wrote anything, but having his name on the cover made the book look more official and more authoritative, but more church-approved, even though the church officially never endorsed it. So what you're really looking at is just one man's obsession, masquerading as universal theology. Now, let's open the book. The Malleus is divided into 3 major parts, and each one builds a staircase toward persecution. The first part lays its foundation by insisting that witches exist, obviously, that their powers are certainly real, and that they function through pacts with the devil. Kramer leans hard on this idea that women specifically are spiritually weaker, more emotional, more gullible, and therefore much more susceptible to demonic temptation. This part, as you are probably aware by now, this isn't real theology. It's more medieval sexism printed with confidence. He argues that witchcraft isn't just superstition, it's heresy. And if it's heresy, then church courts have the right, even the duty, to prosecute it. This reclassification is a crucial part. It turns everyday misfortunes into potential crimes against God himself. The second part of the book describes what witches supposedly do. Not just casting curses. Kramer says they murder infants, ruin crops, cause storms, destroy marriages, steal men's virality. All wickedness is but little to the wickedness of a woman. What else is woman but a foe to friendship, an inescapable punishment, a necessary evil, a natural temptation, a desirable calamity, a domestic danger, a delectable detriment, the evil of nature, painted with fair colors. Most of these ideas weren't widely believed before he wrote them. The Malleus doesn't record folklore per se. It invents a new, unified mythology around witchcraft that bundles every fear into just one figure. But then comes the third part, the most dangerous. Here, Kramer outlines how to investigate witches, how to interrogate them, and how to extract confessions. Fourth, the step consists of other kinds of torture devices being laid out before him if the person questioned under torture is unwilling to make an appropriate confession, and in his being told that he will have to endure them if he does not confess the truth. If even this cannot bring him to feel terror or tell the truth, then sentence to a second or third day of questioning under torture will be passed in the following manner. He openly normalizes torture, saying that even a shred of rumor is enough to start the process. Suspicion equals evidence. Dreams can be testimonies. Neighbors' gossip can be grounds for arrest. It is essentially a guidebook for turning paranoia into convictions. And because the book is written with the tone of absolute certainty, it gives fear a kind of artificial logic, a method, a system. The Malleus arrives at a perfect moment. Europe had just invented mass production of books. Before the printing press, this text would have been copied by monks, very slowly, just one page at a time. It might have reached one monastery, one courthouse, and simply stopped there. But in the 1480s and 1490s, the press turns manuscripts into products, and the Malleus becomes one of the first bestsellers of fear. It was cheap to produce, easy to distribute. It spreads through universities, courts, monasteries, and even legal offices. Dozens of new printings appear. By the early 1500s, the book travels far beyond Germany into France, Italy, Switzerland, the Low Countries, anywhere courts are already anxious and looking for authority. In other words, Kramer's personal vendetta suddenly becomes Europe's reference manual. The Malleus didn't create the witch trials as we know them, but it did standardize them. Before the book, trials were scattered, regional, inconsistent. After the book, they became more uniform and far more brutal. European courts, especially in German-speaking regions, absorbed the Malleus almost directly into their procedures. Judges trained on it. Clergy quoted it, and torturers used it as justification. Entire courtrooms began functioning as if the rules inside the Malleus were the only correct way to deal with accusations. And since the book assumes guilt from the start, almost every accusation slid inevitably towards conviction. Confessions extracted through torture became proof that the methods worked, which led to more trials, more arrests, and especially more fear. Communities spiraled into panic, accusations spread like illness, and because the book encouraged the idea that witches worked in groups, arresting one person usually meant dragging in 10 more. Women have slippery tongues and are unable to conceal from their fellow women those things which by evil they know, and since they are weak, they find an easy and secret manner of vindicating themselves by witchcraft. It created an ecosystem where mistrust became currency and survival depended on accusation. Now, as you might have guessed, the Malleus is actually deeply misogynistic. Shocking, I know. And that's even by medieval standards. His obsession with women's supposed weaknesses become doctrine inside the book, and history reflects the impact across Europe. The majority of people targeted as witches were women, in some regions almost all of them. The Malleus didn't invent that bias, but it did codify it. But here's the surprising part. The Catholic Church never formally accepted the Malleus. Kramer claimed he had approval, but documents show the endorsement was vague at best, and was later criticized by major theologians. The Church found parts of the book theologically sloppy, legally dangerous, and overly sensational. But the problem wasn't Rome, it was everyone else. Local courts, secular courts especially, embraced the Malleus because it gave them a structure for handling fear. And once it entered local legal culture, church opposition didn't matter. The book had all the momentum. By the late 1600s, Europe began to change. Medicine improved, philosophers questioned superstition, legal systems reformed how evidence worked, and torture, once considered routine, fell under new scrutiny, thankfully. Witch trials collapsed almost everywhere. Judges began to doubt spectral evidence. Doctors challenged supernatural explanations. Scientists undermined beliefs in demon. And scholars openly criticized the Malleus as irrational, cruel, and built on dangerous assumptions. Shocking, again. But unfortunately, by then the damage was already done. Tens of thousands of people had been accused, tortured, and executed in systems shaped, directly or indirectly, by one man's book. The Malleus Maleficarum is a reminder that ideas can become weapons. A single text written after one inquisitor's personal failure spread across Europe and helped define an era of fear. It turned rumor into evidence, stereotypes into doctrine, and torture into routine. When we read it now, we're not just reading history, we're reading a manual on how fear spreads, how authority can warp truth, and how quickly a community can collapse under the weight of false certainty. It's a book worth remembering because it shows how dangerous certainty can be when it's printed and obeyed without question.